In the small African town of Kadu, there lived a doctor named Kojo. Dr. Kojo was no ordinary physician. He was a man whose heart was as big as the baobab tree that stood in the middle of the town. Everyone loved him because he was kind, gentle, and always ready to help. Whenever people fell sick, they would rush to Dr. Kojo's small hospital, a place that felt like a second home to many. Pregnant women came to him with their swollen bellies, and Dr. Kojo would smile and say, "Don't worry, my sister. You and your baby will be fine." And he meant it. Dr. Kojo didn't care much about money. In fact, most of the time, he didn't even charge his patients. If a woman came crying because she couldn't afford to pay, he would shake his head and say, "Life is more important than money." People whispered that he was like a red gem shining brightly in their little town. The women of Kadu claimed that Dr. Kojo had magic hands because no matter how difficult a birth was, he would handle it with ease. "Ah, that man," they would exclaim. "He's a gift from the gods." As a result, pregnant women came to him not just from Kadu but from the nearby villages as well. Life in Kadu was peaceful, and everyone believed that as long as Dr. Kojo was there, nothing bad could ever happen. Little did they know, however, that a storm was brewing far beyond the horizon, one that would test the very heart of their beloved doctor. Thus, the story of Dr. Kojo begins. One day, the skies over Kadu seemed heavier than usual, as if they carried the weight of bad news. Dr. Kojo's heart was restless, though he didn't know why. When he returned home that evening, he found his mother lying weakly on her mat, her breathing shallow like the whisper of a fading breeze. "Mama!" Dr. Kojo rushed to her side, his voice trembling. "What is wrong? Why didn't you tell me you were feeling unwell?" His mother, an old woman with a face as wise as the moon, looked at him and smiled faintly. "Kojo," she said softly, "you worry too much. It's just old age catching up with me." But Dr. Kojo was no fool. He checked her pulse, felt her forehead, and listened to her chest. Something wasn't right. Her heart sounded like a drum missing its rhythm, and her skin was colder than the morning dew. That night, Kojo couldn't sleep. He sat by his mother, watching her breathe, his mind racing. He had treated so many patients and brought countless lives into the world, yet now, when it was his own mother, he felt utterly helpless. The next morning, he made up his mind. He called the elders of the town to seek their advice. "My mother is very sick," he told them, his voice heavy with worry. "I have done everything I can, but her condition is beyond me. She needs to go to the big city, to the best hospital there." The elders nodded, understanding the weight of his words. One of them, Baba Adu, said, "Kojo, you have done so much for this town. Whatever you need, we will support you." But the journey to the city wasn't the problem. The problem was the cost. The hospital in the city wasn't for ordinary people. It was where the rich went when they fell ill. The bills there were as high as the tallest mountain. Dr. Kojo sat quietly that evening, staring at the stars. "How can I save my mother?" he whispered to the night sky. His heart felt trapped, and the pain was deeper than the sharpest thorn. Even as he tried to think of a solution, his mother's faint voice called out from inside the house. "Kojo," she said, "don't worry about me. You've already done so much for everyone in this town. If it's my time, then so be it." But Kojo couldn't accept that. He shook his head and said, "No, Mama. You are the reason I became a doctor. I will not give up on you." Thus, Dr. Kojo's journey to save his mother began, even though he had no idea how steep the road ahead would be. The next morning, Dr. Kojo woke up with a plan. He had to raise the money, no matter what. He started by visiting his closest friends, explaining his mother's condition and asking for help. His friends, who loved Mama Kojo like their own mother, gave what they could, but it wasn't enough. Then he turned to the villagers. "Please," he pleaded, "my mother's life is in danger. Any little help will go a long way." The people of Kadu were kind, but they too had their struggles. Some gave small amounts, others offered nothing but prayers instead. "I'm sorry, Dr. Kojo," one old man said, shaking his head. "We wish we could do more. You've done so much for us." When the borrowed money wasn't enough, Dr. Kojo made a difficult decision. He started charging for his services. For years, he had been the town's guardian angel, treating people for free, but now he had to ask for payment. "I'm sorry," he told the sick and the pregnant women who came to him. Dr. Kojo's heart ached as he explained his situation, but he was determined to save his mother. As he navigated this challenging path, he discovered the strength of his community and the bonds of love that held them together. Would he be able to gather enough support to secure his mother's treatment? The journey had just begun, and the heart of Kadu would soon reveal its true colors. If you've made it this far, I encourage you to like and subscribe to the channel to continue enjoying fascinating content like this. Your support is very important to us. Dr. Kojo faced an agonizing dilemma. But I need to keep the hospital running, he reminded himself. Initially, the villagers understood that he needed the money for his mother's medical care. They offered their support, empathizing with his plight. However, as time passed, their understanding began to shift. Whispers started circulating throughout Kadu. Why is he charging us now? They questioned among themselves. Didn't he say life is more important than money? Slowly but surely, the once crowded hospital grew quiet. Patients began avoiding it, choosing to suffer in silence rather than pay for care. They forgot the kindness Dr. Kojo had shown them for years, failing to see the compassionate doctor who had always been there for them. Instead, they saw only a man who now asked for money, a son desperately trying to save his mother. Sitting alone in his empty hospital, Dr. Kojo felt the weight of their betrayal. Yet, deep in his heart, he knew he had no choice. For Mama Kojo, he would keep trying, even if it meant losing the trust of the very people he had devoted his life to helping. One sweltering afternoon, Dr. Kojo sat outside his hospital, the sun beating down on him, but his heart felt colder than the harmattan wind. The emptiness of the hospital and the whispers of the townspeople weighed heavily upon him. It was as though the very people he had cared for had turned their backs on him. Staring into the distance, lost in thought, a voice suddenly called out, "Kojo, is that you?" He looked up to see Kwame, an old friend from his university days. Kwame was dressed in fine clothes, his shoes shiny like polished ebony, and his face was full of smiles. Yet, Dr. Kojo could see something sharp in his eyes. "Kwame!" Kojo exclaimed, surprised but glad to see a familiar face after so long. "It's been years." The two friends caught up, sharing stories and laughter, but soon Kojo's smile faded. His heart was too heavy with worry. "What's wrong, my brother?" Kwame asked, noticing the change in Kojo's demeanor. "You look like a man carrying the weight of the world." Kojo sighed deeply and poured out his heart to Kwame, telling him everything about his mother's illness, the empty hospital, and the money he couldn't gather. Kwame listened carefully, nodding with a thoughtful expression. "Kojo," he said after a moment, "there's a way, but it's not for everyone." "What do you mean?" Kojo asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "There's a man," Kwame began, lowering his voice. "He pays large sums for special things, baby placentas. He sells them to people in the city who use them for medicines and charms. If you can get him what he wants, he'll pay you enough to take your mother to the best hospital in the world." Dr. Kojo's eyes widened in horror. "Placentas? Kwame, that's unthinkable. Those belong to the mothers and their babies. How can you even suggest such a thing?" Kwame shrugged, his face calm and collected. "Think about it, my friend. You're already losing your hospital. The villagers have abandoned you. This is your chance to save your mother. Isn't she worth it?" Kojo shook his head, horrified. "No, Kwame. I can't do that. I'll find another way." But as Kwame left, his words lingered in Kojo's mind like a shadow that wouldn't go away. The days grew darker for Dr. Kojo. Mama Kojo's condition worsened. Her breaths came slower, and her voice weakened. He sat by her side, holding her hand and praying for a miracle, but no miracle came. His debts piled up, and the villagers who had once been full of smiles and gratitude now avoided him like he was a plague. Even his close friends turned away, their excuses cutting deeper than knives. One night, as Mama Kojo lay coughing, her frail body trembling, Dr. Kojo sat outside the hospital with his head in his hands. Kwame's words returned to him like a drumbeat he couldn't ignore. "She's worth it. Isn't she worth it?" The next morning, with his heart heavy like a stone, Dr. Kojo sought out Kwame. "I'll do it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I hope you enjoyed this amazing trip. Subscribe and don't miss our next video. See you next time."